Hello fellow egoists! In today's video we'll finally be diving into a video idea I had been talking about since the beginning of the channel, an analysis on Sae's ego and story, and most importantly what his character tells us about the world of Blue Lock and its inner mechanisms. We'll be working in a sort of pseudo-chronological order, looking at different aspects of Sae's character and try to guess certain parts about his evolution and how he became what he currently is. Let's get into it. Since we're starting in the chronological order, we'll talk about his childhood. From what we see, Sae was a caring brother to Rin, sure of himself and amazing at football. Though when it isn't about football or Rin, he's, let's say, really blunt. And this part of him is a staple of his character that is really important to take into account when we'll then try to process his future actions. This bluntness is something that he's aware of, stating in the Egoist Bible that his biggest strength is the fact that he sees things from an unbiased perspective, but also that because of this he is said to have a dry personality. Now that we've set this straight, let's look at the actual football part. When Sae is scoring or playing, he seems kinda bored, like he doesn't really care. Though he says that what he wants is to be the best. But if he looks bored while playing, why does he aim to be the best? Is there anything that ignites his soul when he's playing? Well, the answer is right after. While dribbling past two people with his amazing arm placement, we see Sae with a fierce look in his eyes, and eventually, when he does an amazing cross into the box where Rin appears to score, we see Sae's eyes shining brightly the same way that the eyes of each striker in the manga did when they found their reason to play football. To say it clearly, the moment they awakened their original ego. Through his brother, Sae was able to feel for the first time the feeling of his ego and the pleasure that came with it being fulfilled. Another thing is that Sae did a pass even though no one was there. Doesn't that sound similar to Bachira in how he looked for a monster all this time? Though the difference is that Bachira created the monster as an expression of his original ego because of the loneliness he felt. But here Sae did this move while aiming to be the best, unlike Bachira who just wanted to not be lonely. So with this we can conclude that while following his original ego fully and aiming to be the best, Sae doesn't play like a striker. He doesn't aim for his own goals, and when he does, he looks bored. But when he's controlling the field and is trying to create the best goal scoring opportunity for others to use, his gaze gets fierce and his eyes shine brightly when someone licks up or surpasses his play. So with just this chapter alone, we see that Sae was always born to be a midfielder type of character. To be exact, a producer similar to Hiyori and Charles, even in the way that he passes to where he thinks the best spot is without caring about who will be on the receiving end. While he must have surely felt the excitement from all of this, we have to remember that Sae is first and foremost a kid, and kids don't understand themselves fully. So because of that, he went to Rin and told Rin that he could become the best but only second to Sae, in a way to keep his pride in check from the looks of it. Though for the rest of the backstory, it does seem that Sae quote-unquote understood to a certain extent his ego of a director, since we then never see him score after all this, only assisting Rin. One interesting thing though, is that he says that Rin's shots are naive, and why is that? It comes from the fact that Rin isn't playing with an ego aiming to be the best, but rather to be second best after Sae. To see more in detail what I mean, you can check out my video on Rid's eyes in the U20 match. And now we get to the point where Sae seems to understand consciously that he isn't a striker. His discussion with Rin. Here Sae asks to Rin what he thinks of when he's playing football, to which Rin responds that he just aims by instinct for goals by going to the bad area. Though Sae doesn't seem to understand this from the way his eyebrows get up while asking this question and how the zoom in is made on Sae's face along with the case, or rather the panel, becoming a bit darker. Maybe even reaching a certain answer in him, since he then questions what will become of Rin when he goes away. And finally, the fateful trip to Spain. There's not a lot of hints given to us about what exactly happened there, but the story does tell us what usually happens with prodigies from Japan when they go overseas and their fates. The important part that's dependent on the translation that you take is that the prodigy has misplaced confidence, a cultural shock and a language barrier that then makes them unable to produce results. Though we can ask ourselves, is Sae's confidence misplaced? And this is where the part about him being blunt and not caring about the opinion of others comes into play. As he says himself when asked what kind of player does he want to be, "Shut up, leave me alone, it's up to me." So with this, we can expect that when Sae came to Spain, he realized he couldn't become the best while trying to play as a striker because he just didn't have the talent for it. He wasn't born to be a striker, and his conversations with Rin must have surely helped him realize this deep down. Thanks to his drive to be the best, but also to do whatever he wanted, and to not try to keep up with the image of the genius striker he had up to this point, he was able to reinvent himself and follow his inner ego of being a director. While being faced with this despair of seeing that his current dream was unable to be ever reached because of his lack of ability, but also that his true desire didn't stand with that dream, he let himself be reborn and not let get pride in the way of it all. So it's not necessarily that Sae got crushed by the system or a specific player and then decided to become a midfielder as an option to flee, but rather that when he was faced with the world standard, he realized that his talent couldn't get him to the top as a striker, and he didn't hold on to his past image and dream of being the best striker in the world, but rather faced reality with what he had. And we could go even further and say that it wasn't even because he didn't work as a striker in the state he was in, since in the light novel we then see that he actually gets a hat-trick with Real Madrid's subsidiary team, so the choice must have truly came not just from a simple lack of abilities in his current self and needing to flee, but a full decision where he needed to change if he wanted to become the best, as he realized he would have hit a wall after a certain point. To say it clearly in Blue Lock terms, when faced with despair, Sae realized he didn't have the abilities to achieve it, and instead of dreams hoping like normies would, he instead decided to go even further than what strikers typically do in Blue Lock. He not only destroyed himself, but also his own dream to become reborn under a new light, a light that was actually his true path to follow. As Rin says in the U20 match, the fact that I can still feel the same as I did when I watched him back then means that no matter what skills he learned, and however wider the world has shaped him, he still continued to hone his own intuition. With this choice made, finally, Sae became what he was truly meant to be. Though the fact that he was able to make this choice and to be fully conscious of it makes it that Sae seems to have gained a deeper understanding of the world of Blue Lock as a whole and what someone needs to be a striker. Specifically how the ego of striker is as important as it gets when someone aims to be to world class, and something that he must have also realized and needed to apply to himself, as he says in his talk with Sendo later on in the story. You'll battle to be the top domestic scorer, become a representative, marry a glamour idol, and that'll be the peak of your football life. I want nothing but to be the world's best. The depth of our desires are incomparable. And in this sense, Sae has now become truly consumed by the idea of becoming the best, setting aside all things that are related to it. Now, for people who like movies, this trait of Sae might remind you of the characters from Whiplash and Black Swan. In both of those movies, we are introduced to characters who enter their respective fields in an aim to become the best in the world, and that slowly and surely kill off anything that isn't related to it, becoming so obsessed with the concept of world's best that they end up in a state where they become what you might call the biggest critic in their own world. Something that's highly reminiscent of Sae's sadism towards others, his way of ripping people apart for their flaws and him not caring about the fact that he has lost a lot of weight and general happiness from the looks of it when he talks to Rin after coming back from Spain. If you're interested in that part of Sae, and generally the two movies I talked about, I highly recommend watching the video I am probably showing on screen right now, which I'll link below in the description, and try to see how the concept talked about there might apply to Sae. To go back to it all, immediately after coming back to Japan, Sae comes to see Rin in a state akin to that of a zombie, having lost weight and looking to have lost his fire, which could be attributed to the fact that Sae may have faced despair like no other, as he realized he wasn't fated to fulfill his dream. Something that must have not only crushed him by itself, but also the isolation and the fact that he had to come to terms with his decision of killing his dream while knowing that his dear brother Rin must be doing his best. After all this, and finally being back from the depth of despair, Sae clenches his fist and says to Rin that he has revised his dream. He will now be aiming to become the best midfielder in the world, showing a new light in his eyes and a determined look to achieve what he seeks. Radically different from the boredom he seemed to feel back when he was playing as a striker in Japan. But sadly, Blue Lock isn't a dream world where everything goes according to one's wishes. Where Sae thought that he could become the best along with his brother as his midfielder, Rin is unable to see eye to eye with Sae, which I explained back in my video about Rin's eyes in the U20 match. Instead of listening at Sae's words properly, Rin fully lashes out at Sae and tells him that he isn't the brother he dreamt with. And in fact, as we saw before, he is not. Just like we said, the decision from Sae to revise his dream, this paradox between his past dream and his true ego, and this Rin facing him and telling him that he isn't the same, must have surely crushed him deep down. But while faced with Rin ensnared in his dream and not knowing the full reality of it all, Sae's face is hidden from us with only one word coming out of his mouth: lukewarm. With this, we could say that Sae's true form as the judge of Japan has been born. To see if he can still dream with Rin, and to see if the lessons he learned at Real were true, Sae put the weight on the scale. The reality of the world that he faced versus his past dream. A final battle to see what is true between the philosophy that he learned from the world and the dream that made him who he is today. A battle that sadly, in Blue Lock fashion, cold and harsh reality wins. Just like Isagi says before entering the biggest match of his career, it's all worthless if I lose here. And the scales have adjudged through this win that Sae's past dream was indeed not the path to follow. While seeing Rin wallowing in despair, we see Sae's eyes as totally blank, while he seems to be thinking, as indicated by the 3 dots in his text bubble, only to say to Rin that he needs to give it up, that his resolution and heat is lukewarm, only to then go on a monologue about Japan's failure to develop talents and that Rin's use of Sae as a means to play soccer is disgusting, that Rin is nothing but a pain in the ass to him, he doesn't need him anymore. Now, instead of taking everything at face value, let's analyze a bit deeper what Sae says compared to what we saw of his character before. The first important thing is that Sae does care, and it's made obvious through him contradicting himself by saying that he needed Rin, while at the same time saying that Rin is nothing but a pain in the ass to him, along with how caring Sae was to Rin. So while some may say that this is meant to be Sae trying to pull an Itachi type of speech to Rin, this could instead be interpreted in the same light as their face-off right before, Sae trying to break ties with Rin, by even going to the point of gaslighting himself in the fact that he doesn't care for Rin, showing once more this aspect of him being overly consumed by football, trying to break off his brotherhood with Rin in an attempt to fully dive into his obsession of becoming the best. Telling to Rin but also to himself that as long as Rin isn't good enough of a football player, he is nothing to him. So in a way we could say that Rin was actually wrong when he thought that Sae was simply using him as a means to an end. Sae did really care about their dream of becoming the best together, but just like Nagi said, to reach the best in the world they will need to change to ever hope to attain it. It is a necessary step no matter how hurtful it might be. So with all this, we see the most important parts about Sae's character and the motions that he seems to have went through in Real. First having a naive dream with his brother while slowly feeling that something was out of touch, to then being faced with the cruel and harsh reality of the world class, but also his inherent lack of ability to reach said dream. Faced with this despair and the harsh environment that Real Madrid must have, Sae chose a radical option, going even further than just fighting off despair to try and fulfill a dream, but to take despair so deep into you that you give up on your dream to find one that you can this time fulfill, understanding that's something that most of us wouldn't be able to accept, let alone see, that we are at our times unable to fulfill certain dreams of ours no matter how hard we try. After this, we only get to see Sae during the U20 arc, where most of his behavior is actually just an extension of what we have discussed previously. So not much more needs to be analyzed, except for 2 things. His talk with Rin about Rin being worthless, that he can never become the best, and him saying that Isagi will be the one to change Japanese football. For the first point about his talk with Rin, we have to remind ourselves of Sae's philosophy. A striker's only measure of worth is by their ability to score goals and get his team to win, to take responsibility for others, creating chances for him and to then score off of them. So when we look at Rin through Sae's philosophy and story, what do we see of Rin? We see a player who showed in his childhood the potential to become the best in the world that was still naive and lacked a certain something, which we know comes from the fact that he was ensnared in his own ego. A player that kept following a childish dream and that got crushed by the Japanese philosophy, turning from incredible talent to mediocrity in Sae's eyes. With the climax of this disappointment coming in the U20 match, where Rin then starts to get devoured slowly and surely by his teammates and is unable to do much to change the balance. With Sae even outright stating that as long as Rin keeps being Sae's brother, he will never be able to surpass him. But there is actually a change in Sae's behavior. That is when Rin finally awakens his original ego and starts destroying the field hideously, with a panel clearly showing a certain amount of shock from Sae's face. Though does that change the fact that Sae still sees Rin as useless in terms of being a striker? Absolutely not, and the proof lies in Rin's final shot of the match. In the final minute of standard time, in a situation where he could have passed and left the job to Isagi, a striker in a much better position, Rin decided to dive into his ego and imagination to take the responsibility of Japan's future on his shoulder, and shot like a true striker would. Though what happened? He missed at the most critical time and the ball just happened to land on Sae's feet. The same way that Isagi created his luck by trusting in Rin to beat Sae and went to a spot where he could call from if luck responded to his call, Sae created his luck by trusting the fact that Rin would miss this shot and went to the place where the ball would most likely land if Rin missed. Therefore proving one final time that Rin was a defective product of a striker in Sae's eyes. Where Rin could fulfill his rebirth and prove Sae wrong, he failed, leading us to Sae calling this shot still lukewarm. With this in mind, we can then go on with the idea that indeed Sae meant absolutely every word he said to Rin before their final face-off. During all of his life, Rin could never break Sae's expectations of him and show his true talent. Even when he was given the best stage to prove Sae wrong, he failed. This was his limit. And honestly, Sae was right in this instance. As I said in my video about Rin's eyes in the U20 match, Rin still lacked something critical for him to truly awaken and use his talent to the fullest. And this was Sae's error and victory in a sense. By saying those things to Rin and forcing him to face those limits of his, Rin awakened and managed to beat Sae, awakening in him his primal urges that Sae wanted to make flow out of Rin for so many years but that he could never do, until he just gave up on trying to and went on his own path, leaving his brother behind. With this win over Sae, Rin had gained the beginning of a new path for him, one that may help him reunite with his brother beyond their dreams. With this, we can head on to the final panels of Sae so far in the story. His talk with Rin about Isagi. Many people think that this is another moment where Sae was doing a Naruto style move, but I would say that again, Sae really didn't think deeper about it. The biggest factor to champion this take is simply the fact that Sae is never looking directly at Rin, only looking at Isagi and the world around him in a sort of haze, as if looking much further than anyone on the field. Even after beating him, Rin is still far away from Sae, something that's even shown to us through the best color page in my opinion of the U20 match arc, where we see Isagi and Aiku looking at the reader, as if facing their challenge properly, whereas Rin is only looking at Sae's back, while Sae is looking much further than all of this. So with this, the main part of the video is finally over with. We saw that Sae was a sort of tragedy in the world of Blue Lock, a character who was doomed because of his circumstances to being a prodigy of Japan, but had managed to face the reality and pain of it all with his courage to be reborn in a new light. Becoming a vessel to what you could call the Judge of Blue Lock, the character who will see the fate and rebirth of Japan through its entire journey and cast its final judgment upon it all, a person overly consumed with the concept of becoming one and only best in the world. Now there are smaller details I would like to talk about in a sort of extra part. The first one is about Sae's "you can still make that face" comment, where we see Rin's face looking as locked in as possible. Well, later on in the story we see through Rin's thoughts that this face is actually supposed to be him when following his inner urges, but what other scene is accompanying this face? The moment where Rin first shot the ball and that made Sae awaken his ego. So it may be that while Rin in his flashback looks cute and all that, he might have had a similar face to what he showed in the U20 match from Sae's point of view, which is a point I already talked about when thinking about the spiral eyes in my video about all of the eyes in Blue Lock. Another detail is why exactly did Sae see that Isagi was the one to make Rin awaken. This comes from the fact that when people get devoured, their individuality is put at stakes, and so they are forced to evolve, to awaken to say it properly, to be able to stop themselves from getting devoured. So with Isagi devouring Rin and becoming the star, he gave Rin a challenge that forced Rin into his absolute limits and therefore made him awaken. I talk about this idea more in detail in my video about the act of devouring and the one about Isagi if you want to check them out. And finally, we arrive at my final point. Why did Sae not pass through to other teammates? For this we have to look at the context of the U20 match. As we saw, when Sae started to awaken, he had no problems passing to Shido and single-handedly destroyed the Blue Lock formation. But when Rin started caging off any opportunities to pass to Shido, Sae was left with not many more options since the U20 team's finishing abilities basically sucked as much as possible. So if we put ourselves in Sae's situation, with this in mind, what do we have? If Sae passes the ball to another teammate of his, then Rin would just end up caging off Shido again, and even keep man-marking Sae in off-the-ball movement. Let's say that Rin went off to cage off Shido's options. Again, then what would happen? The U20 team's finishing abilities would probably still be lacking anyway. To say clearly, the only obstacle for the U20 team was Rin. So if Sae was able to beat Rin in a 1v1, right there and then, in their defensive thirds, then he would take too much time to track back and Sae would be free to do whatever he wants, which would surely lead to another goal for the U20 team, and therefore solidify their win. But even with this in mind, there is still the possibility of Sae going for this play because of emotional reasons, but we can't know for sure really. And with all that said, the video is finally done and over with. I hope you enjoyed it and consider checking out the Discord server of the channel or my personal Twitter, though warning, I shitpost a lot on it. Thank you for watching and have a great one, fellow egoists.